let me get started with today's webinar here, where we talk about the idea of finding the next big thing and making it bigger with innovation archetypes. As we go through today's webinar, there are really 4 key benefits of innovation archetypes for your organization, and we'll cover the how and the why during the presentation. The first is that archetypes will allow you to understand how to use research to manage your innovation portfolio, as opposed to just managing your projects, and how that can tie into a meaningfully higher share price for your organization. We'll talk about how they can guide the level of marketing and effort that should be given to any particular innovation based on how you decide you want to compete. They provide insight into the incrementality of the new products in your innovation portfolio, allowing you to set proper expectations and focus on the opportunities that have the greatest impact on your business. And then finally, we're going to talk about how they give you the ammunition you need to get your big ideas green-lighted, and even more importantly, to understand what to do next when you've uncovered that big idea. So with that, let's dive into what successful innovation looks like, and really why some companies are more successful at uncovering these ideas than others. So in the iPad, Apple was able to find the next big thing, even though looking exclusively at purchase intent as the decision criteria probably would have led them not to pursue this innovation opportunity. Similarly, a large number of CPG companies that leveraged a more narrow view of innovation research missed out while Greek yogurt startup Chobani was able to build a billion-dollar brand in 5 years. Though these are wildly different industries, what Apple and Chobani really have in common is that they were able to enter categories that had enormous growth in front of them, rather than those that had already plateaued. For those companies, innovation was about more than just risk management, which is the direction that I think research has gone over time. It was about finding the next big thing, then figuring out how to make it bigger. About finding those breakthrough innovations that may have a slower trial build but have a greater long-term payoff. And we're really here today to talk about how to ensure you don't miss out on the next big thing, that hidden gem in your innovation pipeline, via an approach we call innovation archetypes. So let's start with how we got here. So I've been in research for about 20 years, and during this time I've seen quite a transformation. You know, I can't see you on the phone, but stop yawning. I won't go on for too long about this. So when I started, research was a little bit like the Wild West. Programs and processes didn't really exist the way they do today. In fairness, the internet really didn't exist either. Though certainly there was a connection from one project to another, and similarities in the types of projects conducted for a given client, there weren't really these programs that we spend so much time talking about today. The projects conducted were really a pretty good balance of risk and reward. Oh, yeah, if I go back 20 years, we also walked to work uphill, both ways. As time went by, a change started to occur. Innovation research became very much a risk management tool at the expense of being a reward maximization tool. I'll say companies, both on the research side and the client side, really became increasingly global. Purchasing became more central to the research process. You know, trying to create bundled programs, really the same way they bundled the purchase of anything, whether it was raw materials, whether it was office supplies. And really finance also, I think, became increasingly influential as companies sought to manage their revenue and profit performance on a quarterly or more finite basis than they typically do. The net result, I think, was that the stage gate process really became central to the research process. That was probably a good thing from a cost containment standpoint. But what got lost in the mix is the fact that the stage gate process, and I think we forget this sometimes, is actually not an innovation process. It's a cost control and a risk mitigation process. The net result is that innovations became more conservative as innovators tried to satisfy all the constituents in their organization. Oh, and tried not to get fired at the same time. If I think about it, you know, in hindsight, the truth is we probably went too far, because a better balanced innovation portfolio, meaning a mix of core, adjacent, and transformational, or sometimes called breakthrough innovations, actually leads to a meaningfully higher share price. So let me say that again, because I think that's really an important piece as we think about it from a research perspective, as well as when we think about how we make the case for some of our innovations internally within our companies. A better balanced innovation portfolio results in meaningfully higher share price performance. Now, I'm skeptical of any set of numbers that align as well as the ones on the slide that you're reviewing. really you're going to tell me that 70%, 20%, and 10% turns into exactly its converse? Really, I don't think that's probably exactly accurate, but I've seen enough research that I think really supports this general principle that we spend a tremendous amount of our time on our core innovations, which deliver a limited, although necessary, return, and we probably shortchange our more transformational innovations, which in the end really generate the vast majority of those returns. As a result, I think what we see is it's not enough to have good innovation in your pipeline, because you can really have good innovations in any of these areas. You also need to have a variety of innovation opportunities that span these different categories, and by definition, different time horizons as well. To understand your innovation portfolio to that degree, you have to move beyond key measures and look to innovation patterns and how those patterns have historically performed in market. You need to look at what Ipsos calls innovation archetypes. Now I'm going to go into more detail later about what innovation archetypes are and how they're constructed, but I wanted to present a very high-level view to begin the conversation. I think it's important to recognize that innovation archetypes paint the portrait of your innovation portfolio, ensuring your mix and strategy are sound. They allow you to move beyond just evaluating new product ideas and provide a portfolio view of your innovations as well. The concept behind innovation archetypes is actually relatively simple. I think logically, the concepts you all develop and the ones that Ipsos tests can be grouped into 4 main domains. You certainly have those ideas that we'd consider to be promising that ought to be making their way toward market. You have those ideas that we would describe as inspiring that maybe have a little bit higher risk, but they also offer the potential for higher reward. You have some ideas that depend on strategy and what you're trying to accomplish with that innovation. And you have ideas that you should probably gently handle with care. We can then dig deeper to really understand not only how your innovations perform, but how to create a strategy that will give your innovation the best opportunity for success. Like I said, we're going to dig into this in more detail in a couple of minutes, but I at least wanted to provide this high-level overview as we started to talk about what archetypes are. So the aim for the remainder of the presentation then is really to provide this additional information about how archetypes work, and more importantly, how you can use them to drive your business forward. First, we want to spend some time actually defining archetypes and talking about why and how they were created. Next, we want to show how archetypes provide a more robust view of your innovation portfolio, moving beyond some of the simple go, no-go decisions that I think we've been conditioned to expect, and really focusing on how they can optimize your innovation pipeline. Third, we want to show you some examples of archetypes in action, how they can help you tailor your innovations to overcome the most common barriers to success. And then finally, we want to spend some time talking about breakthrough innovation, how you can use innovation archetypes to uncover those hidden gems in your innovation portfolio and make the case to get them green-lighted. So to begin, I want to provide a more thorough explanation of archetypes. So let's start with how many, if not most, companies make decisions today regarding which innovations to pursue. So recognizing that we are really focused today on consumer packaged goods innovation, I want to pull an example from the world of durables. I'm going to do this for a few reasons. One, it involves some products that we all know and maybe some of us love. Second, these data are pulled from what we call the Vantis files, which is a part of Ipsos, meaning that we own the data and we can use it directly. For durables products that we know are launching, quite often we will test concepts of those products before they launch, and that enables us to then have that data and be able to track with their success in market. It's a little bit harder to get out in front of some of the consumer packaged goods innovations where maybe you don't know they're coming or companies are a little bit more secretive about them. I'll also say that we're using this example because I think it makes my point pretty clearly, and I'll do almost anything in the service of a good story. So what you're looking at are the purchase intent scores for 3 durables products made by Apple. And my question really is, would you have green-lighted the Apple iPad? The answer, if you look only at purchase intent, is probably not. The iPad, which is on the right and which we know has been tremendously successful, and Apple TV, which is on the left and has not really taken off as of this moment, although Apple continues to try, look almost identical when you think about them solely from a question of would you purchase it or not. Thankfully, as we think about this type of product or a product like Greek yogurt, that's not all the companies we're looking at. And we're going to talk about how those innovation patterns really play a role in doing that. So what Ipsos sees is that instead of purchase intent, in the consumer packaged goods space, innovation archetypes are really based on consumer response patterns of what we see as the in-market drivers of success. So in creating innovation archetypes, we started with those measures that we know correlate to that success in the CPG world, what we call the red measures: relevance, expensiveness, and differentiation. Relevance tells us whether an innovation is meeting a need for consumers. If consumers don't have a clear understanding of a product and how it meets a need, the likelihood that it's going to remain salient is low, no matter how strong that initial purchase intent may be. Expensiveness, as the name implies, tells us how consumers view the price of a new product introduction in relation to existing products. And finally, differentiation tells us whether an innovation is offering a benefit that is unique in the context of the existing market. Combined, Ipsos uses these measures to predict both short-term trial and long-term in-market success. So in developing innovation archetypes, these measures really provided a starting point. And I would say that they provided a necessary but not sufficient basis for understanding patterns in innovation. The analysis became more robust when we also introduced believability into the mix. Believability shows the extent to which the claims you make are credible, which is an important diagnostic in most cases when you're viewing your innovation portfolio and thinking about the role innovation fills in your pipeline and how a given concept can be optimized. Just using the red measures, relevance, expensiveness, and differentiation, instead of purchase intent, starts to help ensure a robust product development pipeline. Let me demonstrate that by looking at a couple of different innovation types. If you're using purchase intent to make your innovation decisions, there's a pretty good chance that your pipeline is overloaded with Me Too types of products at the expense of those breakthrough products that are more likely to drive both revenue and give you incrementality in your innovation. I think this in some ways reflects the fact that we've conditioned ourselves to try to create concepts that are going to get through our innovation process. If I look conversely, by relying on relevance, expensiveness, and differentiation, what you're really able to do is nurture your breakthrough ideas while keeping your Me Too products at a manageable proportion of your innovation portfolio. It's not that each of these aren't important. They are, as we saw from looking at the idea of a balanced portfolio. It's that you want to have them in the right proportions. I'll also say that we typically test a lot more Me Too ideas, and I think you need to be more selective in that process. Where the breakthrough innovations, we test fewer of them, and I think you want to be able to identify them and recognize the nurturing that you're going to have to do. So if I think about innovation archetypes, they really go a step further than just aggregating relevance, expensiveness, and differentiation, along with believability. What they start to reflect are those recurring patterns we see in new product innovations. They're meant to be descriptive, and they're meant to be comprehensive. So in my time in research, it's hard for me to think of an innovation that doesn't relatively closely align with one of these archetypes. And that's the definition of an archetype, which not a word that we use a lot in common speech. It's this idea of having a constantly recurring pattern. In this case, we're talking about patterns in the innovation space, very much what an archetype is meant to be. Successful innovators understand the benefits of having a mix of innovation types in their pipeline. Yet it's really surprisingly rare to find companies who set clear targets relating to the number of each they plan to launch. To create innovation archetypes, what we did is we segmented more than 10,000 recent innovations tested within our consumer packaged goods concept database. In much the same way you can segment consumers and come up with unique profiles to describe each cluster, we were able to do the exact same thing with concepts. The net result is we identified the 12 innovation archetypes you saw previously, into which every CPG innovation can be classified. Innovation archetypes for us have really proven much more robust than just the standard go, no-go types of evaluative measures that we often used to use. And I'd say they move a step beyond the red measures alone. To illustrate the point, what I want to do is take a look at 3 successful product introductions from 2012, and hypothetically the archetype into which each one of those might have fallen. If I think about Breyer's Blast, at their most basic level, it's ice cream with candy or cookies mixed in. Yum, and with some sustained marketing support, no wonder it blasted off. Get it? It blasted off. Okay, I'm moving on. That was bad. If you think about Orville Redenbacher's pop-up bowls, what it did is it essentially created a new product subcategory, which is why we start to think about that as a breakthrough idea. And that becomes one of the criteria is, does it create a category or subcategory of its own? And think about it this way. For the moment, they really control 100% of that market. A breakthrough idea, a great place to be, a way to not only drive incremental revenue, but to over-index or over-source from your competition. And I'll say, at the risk of offending anybody on the phone, Colgate Optic White was a tremendous success story last year, filling a role very similar to that of Crest 3D. And the reason I say that is if you listen to what they say about the products on their websites, Colgate Optic White, whiter teeth in 5 days, Crest 3D, whiten your smile in just 2 days. It sort of sounds like a Me Too product to me at least, but I also have to say that I'd be really proud to take that $141 million in year one sales to my next performance review. So I guess really the point is, in using innovation archetypes, it really provides guidance, but there is no right or wrong way to innovate. The issue becomes you need to have a mix of innovation types within your portfolio in order to maximize the impact you have in market. So if I conclude this section back where we started, innovation archetypes really reflect those recurring patterns we see in new product introductions. And you can build a very successful product in almost all of these archetypes. But to build a successful portfolio, you really need to play in many of these archetypes. So with that overview of innovation in action, let's take a look at the four different categories of innovation archetypes, how they can paint a full portrait of your innovation portfolio, and really what it ought to mean for your innovation process. So let's start with the worst first. So no matter how gentle that we might want to be as a research company, telling you what a great job you're doing with all of your innovations, there really are just some innovations that shouldn't see the light of day. So we've termed these innovations handle with care, and they really represent, based on the concepts that we test, about 26% of those innovations. It's not just these innovations don't test well, it's that they're also extremely difficult to fix. Unless you have some specific reason why you have to make one of these innovations successful, for example, you purchased technology that you're trying to figure out how to use, we typically recommend spending your time elsewhere. In contrast, your promising ideas really represent those that are ready to progress to the next stage, be that next stage product or packaging development, or maybe it's moving directly from the innovation funnel to the launch funnel. Winners are those innovations that do well really all the way around, highly relevant, relatively unique, at a reasonable price. Underpriced is one of my favorite archetypes, as it makes for a great presentation when you can stand up and say, you have a great product, you have a great idea, and oh, by the way, you get to raise your price as opposed to saying you get to lower your price. And those innovations that are a good start may require just a little bit of diagnostic refinement, a little bit of nurturing, but again, they look pretty close to ready to move forward. Almost a quarter of the concepts tested by Ipsos show what I would describe as immediate promise. Finding inspiring innovations is more difficult, representing only about 16% of the innovations that Ipsos tests. I think this low percentage really supports the premise from earlier in the presentation, that as innovators, we've become somewhat accustomed to going the safe route. I'd also say a little bit more fairly that these are harder to uncover, and it takes a little bit of extra work, which is maybe why the innovation process is a little bit heavier in some of these other areas. Those innovations that we've termed as atypical typically have a very pronounced strength, but it's often offset by an equally significant challenge. By contrast, breakthrough innovations tend to have extremely high uniqueness and even reasonable relevance, but it's offset in most cases by a very poor price perceptions and by low believability. They represent only about 5% of those innovations tested by Ipsos. So these innovations typically offer the greatest returns and incrementality. They also have the highest risk, given that they usually have a slower trial build and require significant capital investment, or at least they can require that significant capital investment. An effective innovation portfolio treats breakthrough innovation as more iterative in nature. So the number of breakthrough innovations being pursued does have to be managed wisely. The point of this presentation is not to say fill your entire portfolio with breakthrough innovations. It is to say that we ought to be thinking about innovation differently, and the work we put into certain types of innovation is probably more iterative than the work we put into other types of innovation. If I go back to those figures from the Harvard Business Review article that I quoted earlier, it suggests that, at least in Ipsos experience, breakthrough innovations are underrepresented by about half in the concepts tested. The article suggests that to have the higher share price, that should represent somewhere in the range of 10% of your innovations. Here we're talking about what Ipsos sees as about 5% of our innovations. Finally, those innovations that depend on strategy represent about 34% of our database of concepts. These are the innovations which may not be the largest or the most incremental, but still certainly may serve a purpose in terms of competitive response or new news for the category. Premium innovations may be relying on your branding to justify their price point, as opposed to the relevance or differentiation of the product. I have to admit that if I'd gotten to choose, I might have actually classified the premium archetype as being a winner, but it turns out that I don't win every argument that I engage in. Talking about value is nice, but most often we see it mean lower priced innovation for a well-known brand, designed to compete with a lower tier of competitor. To be clear, sometimes this can be really effective, and which is why we say this depends on strategy. But I think it's also important to recognize that sometimes what this really does is it erodes brand equity. Me Too innovations are really exactly as the name applies, and then those niche targeted innovations present really an interesting opportunity, because it may start as something that is a very limited opportunity, and the question is it going to stay a limited opportunity, or does it have the potential to be closer to a breakthrough idea with a slow build and eventually having mass acceptance? So really the way we've been talking about innovation archetypes up to this point is we're mainly talking about them on a post hoc basis. And I think that's an important way to look at innovations. However, I would probably go so far as to suggest that when you're coming up with new product ideas, you ought to actually have a predefined innovation archetype into which you want to fall. Not every product is going to be breakthrough. Not every product is going to be premium. There are clearly times where a Me Too product can be very successful and is an important competitive response. The goal is really to have a well-rounded pipeline, not a haphazard one, which is, I think, a lot of what we see today. So we've taken a look at how innovation archetypes can help judge whether you have a well-rounded innovation pipeline. But let's also take a look at the impact the archetypes can have on improving the innovations within your portfolio and how you can use them to get innovations on track as you think about the strengths and weaknesses of the things you're testing. Think about it this way. Archetypes are really a big step in expanding the role of innovation from merely evaluating concepts to nurturing the best ideas. Let's do that by reversing the discussion and taking a look at what innovation archetypes might emerge from innovations with a pronounced and defining characteristic. Let's do this by exploring the story from the standpoint of the key measures: relevance, expensiveness, differentiation, plus believability. I'll say having a new product idea with high relevance is really a wonderful place to be. There's no bad choices for you as marketers and innovators. The idea that you can end up with a product that's a winner, is premium, has the potential to be breakthrough, that's a great place to be. The questions are really how much you dial up differentiation and what's your pricing strategy going to be. But what we see if we think about the idea of having high relevance is very seldom should a company walk away from an innovation that is perceived as highly relevant, that's really perceived as meeting the needs of consumers in a better way than maybe what they're experiencing today. I'd say short of the realization that either the company can't make the product that's promised, or the company does not want to because they decide, hey, even though this is a good innovation, it might be off strategy for what we want to accomplish. Too often, products with a higher than average price point fail to generate sufficient purchase intent to move to the next innovation stage. And yet we know that this is really what a lot of our clients, a lot of the national brands are looking for. I'll say that I think a lot of the reason for this is because based on some research that Ipsos has conducted, the purchase intent measure, I'd say, is uniquely sensitive to changes in price. I'd actually go so far to say is that price perceptions are the dominant, though not necessarily the exclusive element being measured when you take a look at something like purchase intent. That's not to say that high expensiveness is always a good thing. as evidenced by the appearance of the overpriced archetype when you think about products that have a relatively high expensiveness or a high price. I will say it's to say that expensiveness shouldn't be always viewed as it should be viewed as a strategy choice. And above average expensiveness is not always evidence of a flawed offer. And in fact, in many cases, it's evidence of an extremely strong offer where you have the right to recoup that price because you're providing something of a value that others in the industry are not providing. Given the proliferation of new products in the market, I'd actually argue that differentiation is becoming increasingly important. I'd also suggest that without a strong brand or constant innovation, differentiation is really hard to maintain. Sometimes it's a little bit short-lived, but you do have the opportunity to own that differentiating point for a period of time. Highly unique products have the opportunity to be winners with mass appeal. They have just as much likelihood to be so unique that the appeal starts to narrow. So strategically, the type of innovation being pursued should dictate how much to dial up or dial down that differentiation. Because being unique is often a gateway to a strong innovation, but it's no guarantee of success. Finally, let's focus on innovations that we test that have low believability. I recognize that for the other key measures, I focused on the benefit of having that particular element present. But with believability, it's really more interesting to discuss when it's absent, because many things that we introduce, believability is something of a given. I think it's more interesting to look at the patterns when maybe consumers don't necessarily believe our initial claims. Innovations with low believability really provide the opportunity to have a hard discussion about whether or not you can actually do what you're proposing. If you're unconvincing, this suggests you're differentiated but not credible in the pursuit of a given innovation. This suggests you need to truly determine if you can deliver on the promised benefit and come up with a way to more clearly support your benefit. In terms of potential products that are viewed as either breakthrough or atypical, the question is whether what you're promising is too good to be true. If you can build it, people will come, but it's going to take some convincing to do that. So now that we've talked about some of the different strength profiles of the given archetypes, I want to close by spending just a little bit of time digging in on breakthrough innovation. I personally believe that the addition of innovation archetypes to your evaluation of new product ideas is really a tremendous step forward in managing your innovation process and your innovation portfolio. But if you took nothing else away from this conversation than the idea that you should be viewing breakthrough innovation differently maybe than we are today, and using different measures to get at it, I'd really consider this to be time very well spent together. So as we talked about earlier, a successful innovation process really has concurrent efforts in three distinct phases. So there's that idea of core innovation, which I would describe as being focused on product maintenance. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a very necessary way. It could be incremental improvements. It could be new news. It could be close-in line extensions. This uses a lot of our time, and if we don't engage in some of this behavior, our currently relevant products are going to become less relevant over time. It's just how it works. Adjacent innovations aren't necessarily new categories per se, but they may be new for your company or the manufacturer in question. And by expanding into adjacent categories, there tends to be more, I'll say, incremental revenue available to you as a manufacturer, assuming that you're able to have credibility within that space. So again, they're not necessarily the biggest breakthrough innovations. However, what they do is they generate increased incrementality from innovating within the exact categories in which you already compete. And then finally, there's that transformational innovation, which tends to result in category creation, or subcategory creation as the case may be. And what that really does is it leads to market leadership. It also tends to result in entering categories that are starting their growth phase rather than those that have plateaued. Another big part of having a balanced innovation portfolio. Supporting what we've seen, Accenture took a look at innovation similar to the one that I've been showing that was published in the Harvard Business Review, and really came to a virtually identical conclusion. In the chart you're looking at, the axes represent the consumer value benefit and the competitive advantage of innovations. Obviously, the more you have of each of these, the better off you are. You can see that increasing benefits conveyed to breakthrough as opposed to incremental innovation. So you're really getting more out of your breakthrough innovations in terms of the impact on business over the longer period of time, because that's where you're generating your incremental revenue from. I'll say if Accenture believes it, Harvard Business Review publishes on it, and Ipsos supports it, how can this not be true? You can take that one all the way to your CFO. The first step in having more breakthrough innovations in your pipeline is really to stop eliminating breakthrough innovations from your process unnecessarily. What that really requires is a couple of things. It requires creating a specific strategy for breakthrough innovation. And by that I mean we need to recognize the consumer challenges in introducing breakthrough innovation are a little bit different. It means we have to move away maybe from strict purchase intent as the criteria we use. We need to use archetypes to identify that breakthrough profile and ensure the right number of innovations from this profile make it through our pipeline. Again, this is not about switching from entirely core innovation or close-in innovation to all breakthrough innovation. It's about getting a balanced innovation portfolio and getting it right. But just identifying breakthrough innovation is really not enough. You need to recognize how these innovations differ when making the business case, because they do carry increased risk. They may require capital expenditure on your part. They have a slower trial build. They typically have a longer payback period than maybe we're used to or we're comfortable with. Oh, yeah, and did I mention that companies that pursue the right proportion of breakthrough innovations have meaningfully higher share prices? Oh, yeah, there's that too in terms of thinking about the role breakthrough innovation should play. What we've seen in analyzing our database is that by plan or by chance, breakthrough innovations are easier to come by in personal care and beauty, as well as home care categories, than maybe in some of the other categories. And I think that's important to recognize as we think about innovation. There's some categories where maybe the idea of breakthrough is a little bit more natural. There's maybe some where it's become a little bit less natural for us as marketers and market researchers, and we need to be more focused on this. It goes back again a little bit to that point of archetypes provide a post hoc evaluation, but they also provide an ad hoc framework as we start to think about where we want to innovate before we ever write those concepts. Now, my personal hypothesis is these categories are more brand-driven than maybe some of the other categories, making breakthrough innovation a little bit more probable, but that's really just a hypothesis on my part. I think it's something, as much as coming up with hypotheses, it's something we ought to be considering as we're thinking about concepts and we're drafting those concepts. We also need to recognize that unlike other innovation opportunities, where creating a sufficiently successful concept is really the green light to moving forward, successfully introducing breakthrough innovation, even with identifying them via concept tests, even with relatively good concept testing scores, is still very much iterative in nature. Really, concept testing, even with archetypes, is only the start to identifying and launching these breakthrough innovations. There's still a lot of additional work to be done. So take Tide Pods, for example, which, according to the Associated Press, required 8 years of development, 450 product sketches, 6,000 consumer tests, hundreds of millions of investment dollars, and achieved, over $500 million in year one sales. It's really something to think about at a minimum. At a maximum, what it suggests is that while we may have the ability to crank out some of those Me Too concepts or Me Too ideas over our lunch hour, we're unlikely to come up with the next big breakthrough idea in that way. It suggests that we need to think about where these ideas come from, how we go about identifying the insight around them, how we go about testing them, and how we go about nurturing them ought to be different than what we see in other parts of our portfolio. I think it's also to say that if you find what you believe to be a breakthrough idea, this kernel of a good idea that over time could generate this high incrementality, you really need to nurture it for all it's worth. It needs to be treated differently, I think, is the important part as we think about this from a process standpoint. So as we wrap up this presentation on innovation archetypes, what I want to do is loop back to where we started, the idea that innovation archetypes can provide a better understanding of your new product ideas and really how you go about improving those new product ideas. Innovation archetypes are there to paint the portrait of your innovation portfolio, ensuring that your mix and your strategy are sound. We talked about the fact that they really provide a broad classification for how to think about your innovations. Are they promising? Are they inspiring? Does it depend on your strategy? Or are they things that we don't like to talk about, things that ought to be handled with some care, some discretion may be gently eliminated from your pipeline. They also then provide some further delineation between new product ideas to really help you know what to do with them and to really know what a balanced innovation portfolio means and what it looks like. In other words, what they allow you to do is identify and prioritize your tested concepts. Consider your innovations in a strategy context, not just an absolute context, which is where I really think the market is evolving toward. It allows you to start to uncover those hidden gems and breakthroughs that maybe other approaches miss, as well as, I'd say, know what to do with them when you find them. And it allows you to drive the next innovation steps to really maximize the potential of each innovation opportunity with the least amount of effort. Because you're working from a strategy standpoint, you really know, is this something that I ought to move right to launch without a lot of additional work, or is this something I ought to be more iterative with, more nurturing with? I will say that innovation archetypes can be made available with every concept test that Ipsos conducts. So I do hope you'll contact either me, and I think all of you have my email address, or your Ipsos account representative to find out more about applying innovation archetypes to your business and to the concepts that you test. So with that, I really want to thank everybody for joining me here today. If you give me just 5 seconds, let me take a look and see if there are any questions that have come in, and I will try to quickly address those. And I think we should be wrapping up here shortly. Just give me 1 second. All right, so in terms of questions, there's a couple of questions that have come in. So the first question is really, why do you think most pipelines are full of incremental innovations when most companies say they want more breakthrough types of innovations? And I think we've touched on this to some extent, but I think there's another element of it we haven't talked about, which is the idea that I think we need to recognize that you all are under a lot of time and cost pressures that are really imposed upon you. There's always this pressure to go faster and to spend less, which in many cases is a good thing. Maybe in other cases it causes us to miss some opportunities. I think we'd be foolish to believe that this doesn't really limit longer-term vision. So by contrast, I think what we see is those companies that tend to have a greater proportion of breakthrough innovations in their pipeline, they probably do maybe a couple of things that are a little bit different. I'd say first, they start by searching for a consumer insight rather than just, I'll say, cranking out a concept. And I don't necessarily mean that in an entirely pejorative sense, but I do think we need to recognize that there is a benefit to understanding what the consumer insight that we're trying to address is, as opposed to focusing on our capabilities as a manufacturer. I'd say the second thing that we see is there are companies that consistently exhibit some willingness to maybe pull some innovation opportunities outside of the strict constructs of StageGate and really recognize that the innovation may have to be more iterative for that payoff to be greater. I think it's really putting the high risk, high reward to go along with the low risk, low reward, which is something I think over time we've lost a little bit of that higher risk, higher reward for whatever reason it might be. All right, there's one more question here. Hang on. All right, this next question, it's why do you think more companies haven't adopted a portfolio view of innovation? And I think the answer is a little bit similar to what we talked about before. I would say, first of all, I think quite a few companies, and certainly more companies, are starting to develop this view. But I'd absolutely agree that it's not the majority that are kind of developing this portfolio view. I think really the biggest reason is, I don't know, it's more complex. You might even say more robust. I'd like to say more robust than maybe a go, no-go decision. And I think as I think about the clients I talk to, maybe I hear a couple of things that I think are a little bit conflicting in nature. On the one hand, what I hear is a go, no-go decision is not necessarily robust enough for what I want. On the other hand, as we start to move to something that's a little bit more robust, what we hear back is that, in fact, now how am I going to explain this to marketing? Because they're used to the one number go, no-go decision. What I'd argue is if we take a portfolio view, maybe that go, no-go decision is okay for some of the Me Too innovations. Maybe it's okay for some of the value innovations or the closer in things that we do. Because the goal is not just to add time and I'll say cost and effort to every innovation. It's actually to figure out how to spend our money smarter. And what we're trying to do is reduce the amount of time and money spent on those closer in innovations, which might still mean closer to a go, no-go type of decision. Whereas the place that archetypes can really have benefit are those things that are maybe a little bit further outside of the norm and maybe have a little bit more potential in market but are going to take a little bit of nurturing. But to get to that, I think you need to have that portfolio view when you create concepts, and then you need to be able to provide something like archetypes on all concepts so you can quickly sort out which ones should I be spending my time nurturing versus which ones maybe should I leave in a more traditional stage gate approach. All right, I actually have 2 or 3 more questions here, but I think what I'm going to do is, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up, because I'm a big believer that when Bill Gates created Outlook, he should have had every meeting end 10 minutes early so that people have time to actually use the washroom and get a drink of water in between those meetings. So what I want to do is I want to thank you for your time and for your attention. For those of you that submitted questions I didn't answer, I will follow up directly via email with you. And then once this is over, there will be additional information with a link to the recording and a point of view coming out to all of you as well.